In the highest peaks of the Andes, a line of steel cuts through the rock. It is a scar of industry, a testament to human will. This is the Trans-Andine Railway, a project celebrated as a triumph of 19th-century engineering. The official story is one of dynamite, steam, and heroic labor, of men conquering a mountain range with little more than iron tools and relentless determination. We are shown faded photographs of workers and steam shovels, and told a simple, powerful story of progress. But this story has a fundamental problem. It is impossible. The logistics required to build this railway, at this altitude, in this time period, do not add up. The sheer weight of the materials, the fuel needed for the machines, the food for the thousands of workers, when you follow the supply chain backward, it collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. The official narrative is not just missing a few details. It is missing a foundation in physical reality. In this investigation, we will not look at fringe theories. We will look at simple math. We will examine shipping manifests, energy requirements, and the basic principles of logistics. We will show you that the story of the Trans-Andine Railway cannot be true as it is told. We are not told the whole story of how our world was built. Observe the path of the railway. It does not simply follow valleys or gentle slopes. It cuts directly through solid mountain rock. We see tunnels, miles long, bored with a precision that seems to defy the tools of the era. We see bridges spanning chasms so deep that the foundations seem to grow out of the abyss itself. The anomaly is not just that it was built, but how it sits in the landscape. It feels imposed, almost alien. The sheer rock faces are cut away in clean, vertical lines, as if a giant machine simply sliced off the side of the mountain. These are not the rough, blasted-out passages you would expect from dynamite and hand tools. They are too clean, too uniform. The gradient of the track is relentlessly consistent, a feat of survey and excavation that would be challenging with modern GPS and laser-guided equipment. In the late 19th century, at over 10,000 feet where the air is thin and the weather is a constant, brutal force, how is such precision achieved? Look at the retaining walls, built from perfectly fitted stones, holding back entire mountainsides. Each stone weighs tons. Each one had to be quarried, shaped, and lifted into place. The official explanation credits manual labor and simple cranes. But the scale is off. It's a visual dissonance. The primitive technology shown in the historical photos does not match the industrial, almost surgical, perfection of the final product. It's like seeing a hand-carved canoe towing a battleship. The two images do not belong together. What are we not seeing in these pictures? What part of the process has been erased from the visual record? The railway itself is the primary witness. And its testimony is one of a technology and a methodology that does not align with the story we have been given. The central problem is not one of engineering, but of logistics. To build a railway, you must first be able to reach the construction site. But the railway was the only viable path. This is the paradox. Before a single track was laid high in the Andes, every piece of equipment, every tool, every steel rail, every bag of cement, and every lump of coal had to be transported there. The official narrative suggests this was done using mule trains. Let us consider what this actually means. A single steel rail for this type of track weighs over 500 kilograms. A steam-powered drill or a boiler for a pneumatic compressor weighs several tons. The machinery to even begin the work is monstrously heavy. A mule can carry perhaps 100 kilograms on flat ground. On a steep, treacherous mountain path at high altitude, that capacity is drastically reduced. How many mules would it take to carry a multi-ton boiler? It's not a matter of simply adding more mules. You cannot strap a 2-ton piece of solid iron to the backs of 40 animals. It is a physically impossible task. Now, consider the fuel. Steam engines and pneumatic drills are not efficient. They consume vast quantities of coal. To bore through miles of solid granite requires a continuous, massive supply of energy. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of tons of coal. Where did it come from? It had to be shipped to South America, unloaded at a port, and then carried up the same impossible mountain paths to the worksites, day after day, week after week, for years. This creates an absurd logistical loop. You need a railway's worth of transportation capacity just to bring up the fuel and materials to build the railway itself. It is a snake eating its own tail. We are asked to believe that an army of laborers, numbering in the tens of thousands, was sustained in this environment. They needed food, water, shelter, and medical supplies. This represents another supply chain, parallel to the industrial one, stretching back down the mountain. The official story glides over this. It presents the railway as appearing on the mountain, as if the tools and materials teleported to their point of use. But in the real world, logistics are everything. Without a plausible supply chain, the entire project is not just difficult, it is impossible. When we look for the records that would solve these logistical puzzles, we find almost nothing. The official histories of the Transandine Railway are filled with poetic language. They speak of indomitable spirit, heroic sacrifice, and the triumph of modern industry. These are narratives, not ledgers. They are stories designed to inspire, not to document. Where are the detailed shipping manifests? Where are the purchase orders for the millions of tons of steel and coal? Where are the daily work logs from the dozens of remote construction camps, detailing fuel consumption, dynamite usage, and progress reports? They are missing, not just for one section, but for the entire high-altitude portion of the project. We find general summaries, high-level financial reports that say a certain amount was spent on materials or transport. But the specifics, the granular data that would prove how this was done, are absent. It is the equivalent of a company claiming to have built a skyscraper but having no receipts for steel or concrete. When specifics are provided, they often come in the form of standardized, boilerplate descriptions that are repeated for other major construction projects of the same era. The same phrases, the same heroic archetypes, the same glossing over of impossible details. It's a template. Why use a template when the actual story of overcoming these unique Andean challenges would be so much more compelling? The absence of records is not proof of anything in itself. But in a project of this scale, a project involving multiple corporations, international financing, and two national governments, the lack of meticulous record-keeping is a profound anomaly. These were not disorganized amateurs. These were the leading industrialists and engineers of their day. They were obsessed with efficiency, with accounting, with tracking every penny and every bolt. The idea that they would fail to document the single most complex logistical operation of the project is not credible. It suggests the records are not missing. It suggests they never existed. Because the logistical operation they would have to describe never actually happened. The official story fails not because it is wrong, but because it is empty. The Transandine Railway is not an isolated mystery. It is a single, dramatic example of a global pattern from the 18th and 19th centuries. All around the world, we see monumental feats of engineering that seem to strain or even snap the logistical and technological chains of their supposed eras. Consider the Gotthard Tunnel in the Swiss Alps, another high-altitude marvel. Or the vast, geometric star forts found across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, structures requiring the excavation and movement of millions of cubic meters of earth with a precision that is baffling for pre-industrial societies. Each of these projects has an official story. And in each story, we find the same elements: a narrative of heroic, almost superhuman labor, a glossing over of the immense logistical challenges of material and fuel transport, and a conspicuous lack of detailed, verifiable records for the most difficult phases of construction. The motif is always the same. We are shown pictures of men with shovels and are told they moved mountains. We are shown primitive steam engines and are told they powered a global industrial revolution overnight. The timelines are always compressed. Decades of work are supposedly completed in a few short years. The environmental challenges, extreme cold, high altitudes, remote locations, are acknowledged as obstacles but never quantified as logistical problems. It is as if history has a standard template for explaining away impossible constructions. Why is the story the same from the Andes to the Alps? Why do the records for a fortress in India fail in the same way as the records for a railway in Chile? This pattern suggests that we are not looking at dozens of isolated, poorly documented projects. We are looking at a single, systemic misrepresentation of our own history. The 19th century is presented as the dawn of our modern age, a time when humanity built the world we now inhabit. But the evidence on the ground, the steel and stone itself, tells a different story. It speaks of a capability that does not match the official narrative. The Transandine Railway is a key piece of this puzzle, because its location is so extreme, its logistical hurdles so obvious, that the cracks in the official story are impossible to ignore. Let us move away from interpretation and focus on cold, hard numbers. A single kilometer of track required approximately 100 tons of steel for the rails alone. The highest, most difficult section of the railway spans over 160 kilometers. That is 16,000 tons of steel rails. This does not include the steel for the bridges, the locomotives, the rolling stock, the switching gear, or the tunnel supports. Let's be conservative and say the total steel requirement was 30,000 tons. Remember, each ton had to be carried up thousands of meters on paths that did not exist. Now, let's analyze the energy. The rock in the Andes is primarily granite, one of the hardest substances on Earth. The drills of the late 19th century were pneumatic, powered by compressed air. The compressors were powered by steam engines. Steam engines were notoriously inefficient, often losing over 90% of their energy. Let's calculate the coal required to drill just one of the major tunnels, like the Cumbre Tunnel, which is 3.2 kilometers long. A conservative estimate, based on the energy required to cut granite and the inefficiency of the machinery, would place the coal requirement in the range of 50 tons per day of drilling. If they progressed at a rate of just a few meters a day, the tunnel alone would require over 20,000 tons of coal. This is a single tunnel. We have 30,000 tons of steel and 20,000 tons of coal for just a fraction of the project. That is 50,000 tons of material. A mule carries 100 kilograms. To transport this weight would require 500,000 separate mule journeys up the mountain. And this calculation does not even include the weight of the food, water, and supplies for the thousands of workers, or the fuel for the locomotives that would have been assembled on site to help with construction. The numbers are staggering. They create a traffic jam of animals and supplies on the mountain that defies all reason. There is no historical record of a supply chain of this magnitude. No evidence of vast armies of mules. No documentation of the purchase and transport of this much coal. The numbers are not a small discrepancy. They represent a fundamental failure of the official narrative. The math simply does not permit the story to be true. It is not a matter of opinion or historical debate. It is a matter of arithmetic. So if the railway could not have been built from scratch in the manner we are told, what is the alternative? This is not a question of ancient aliens or lost super technology. The most logical explanation is often the simplest. And the simplest explanation here is that the project of the late 19th century was not one of creation, but of restoration. What if the primary route, the tunnels, and the major earthworks already existed? What if a previous generation, or perhaps a previous civilization, had already carved the path through the mountains? If the hardest work, the tunneling through miles of granite, the slicing away of mountainsides, the construction of the primary bridges and retaining walls, was already complete, then the 19th century project becomes understandable. It transforms from an impossible feat of logistics into a manageable, albeit still difficult, project of clearing, repairing, and laying track. This controlled hypothesis resolves all the major contradictions. The missing logistical records for heavy machinery and fuel? They are missing because those machines were not needed on the same scale. The primary excavation was already done. The impossibly clean cuts and precise tunnels? They were the work of a different, perhaps more advanced, set of tools from an earlier time. The impossibly short timeline? The project was not about building from zero, but about finishing a pre-existing infrastructure. This would explain the vague, heroic language in the official histories. The story was reframed. A project of repair was sold to the public and to history as a project of conquest. The men who cleared the debris and laid the rails were recast as the men who conquered the mountain itself. This hypothesis does not require us to believe in magic. It only requires us to believe that our historical timeline might be incomplete. That there may have been cycles of development and decline that are not recorded in our books. The evidence is the structure itself. The railway is a piece of infrastructure that feels out of time. The hypothesis of restoration is the only one that honors the physical evidence without violating the laws of physics and logistics. The Transandine Railway stands today, in many parts abandoned, as a silent monument. The official history tells us it is a monument to the will of 19th century man. But the numbers, the logic, and the landscape itself suggest it is a monument to something else entirely. It is a monument to a story that cannot be true. We have examined the visual evidence, the practical logistics, the failure of the official records, and the mathematical impossibilities. The conclusion is not that the railway doesn't exist. It is that the story of its creation is fundamentally flawed. We are left with a choice. We can accept the comfortable, heroic narrative, despite the contradictions. Or we can accept the unsettling possibility that our history is not as we have been taught. That the world we inherited was not built in the way we are told, and that the capabilities of the past may have been far different from what we imagine. This is not about one railway. It is about a method of questioning. It is about looking at the great works of our ancestors not with simple admiration, but with a critical eye. It is about demanding that the story makes sense. The world is full of these anomalies, hiding in plain sight. All you have to do is look closely, and ask the simple questions. What you find may change the way you see everything. The questions are always more important than the answers. If you find value in asking them, you will find more of our work here.